of the prayer. The delicate sweetness of spring gave way for the bright warmth of summer. Rufus and Rebecca were 14 now, but Grandpa still said nothing about letting them get married. It was a warm, rich gold afternoon. Rufus was gathering almonds. He picked one and startled a little creamy brown cat. In spring, the grass had been soft, bright green, and spangled with tiny white flowers. Now it was rich copper gold like the setting sun. Rufus plucked the almonds quickly and looked for another bush. Maybe it was a good thing that Grandpa was taking his time letting Rufus marry Rebecca. Perhaps it was best. Rufus was a mess lately. He'd grown nearly overnight. He was taller than his mother now, almost as tall as Mark, but he hadn't grown stronger at the same time. He had once been a well-grown, stocky boy. Now he's painfully thin and elongated. Rufus's shaggy dark hair felt it was soaked in olive oil. The only condolence was that Rufus's voice had deepened. What if Rebecca didn't want to marry him anymore? Rebecca wasn't like that, right? Rufus picked one last almond. That should be enough. Better to push away these insecurities. After all, what did they help? He was on his way home when he saw his friends coming his way, with boats they had recently purchased. One belonged to Grandpa, Rebecca, Mark, and Adelheid, the other to Octavius and Mazza, and the last one belonged to Rufus's family. We thought it would be a good day to use our noon boats. We have fishing nets, Rebecca chirped. Rufus smiled. It was a perfect day for some fishing. The water was so clear and so beautiful. Mazza and Mator stayed behind so that they could spend some time with Luna and Moses, but everyone else got on the boats, so Rufus and Octavius each had a whole boat to themselves. At first, the fishing was perfect. The fish came freely, and the water was as glorious as morning light shining through sapphires. But it wasn't long before the nets of the Christians came up empty over and over again, and something was off. The sea was eerily still. No gulls were squawking. The fish did not flit about beneath the surface. The water itself was like glass. A thin glass that separated Rufus's world from its mysterious reverse. Dark, violet-gray clouds painfully slowly gathered in the sky. When the small party spoke, their words lingered in the air and sank into the silent water, so they held their tongues. Even the ripples from their oars seemed so tiny that they did nothing to disturb the stillness. Storm is coming, Mark mused. Storm? Was he mad? A storm was wild and loud, and everything this was not. We should go back. Just then a violent wind blew, tearing up the water like a dog tearing earth. It really piled up just like that. Their boats were bobbing among the waves like tiny baskets. How did that escalate so quickly? Rufus held his breath and squeezed his eyes shut. He was in the air. The water had picked up his boat. We're gonna die. We're gonna die. Slam! Crack! Lightning shone through Rufus's eyelids as he slammed into something hard. The electric light filtered through a wave, making it glow with an eye-melting, unnatural blue. Rufus rolled off the hard thing and fell in the water. It was so cold. What just happened? Rufus's boat had slammed into Rebecca's. The two vessels were split in half. Shredded, splintered wood was scattered in the broken water. His friends' heads bobbed up and down in the waves. Is everyone all right? Mark shouted over the howling of the storm. The voices of Mark's friends shakily confirmed. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck the dark, cold water. It exploded. It was beautiful, terrible, horrible, like some angry goddess out for revenge. Quick, everyone get into my boat now! Octavius almost screamed. A rogue wave abruptly slammed Rufus into one of the sinking boats. A breathtaking pain shot through Rufus's shoulder. It was like a spear digging into his collarbone. He dragged himself onto Octavius's boat, but his shoulder burned like fire ants. Rebecca dived back into the ocean. What are you doing? Mark demanded. Rebecca began throwing chunks of wood away from the remaining boat, breaking the bigger pieces in any way she could. Oh. Rufus, Octavius, and Mark jumped in after her. Rufus, get back in the boat. You shouldn't. I'm fine, he assured her firmly. Good. She didn't have time to fight about it. Lightning illuminated her eyes with shocking yellow. Fine, just get out there then. A cold wave came out of nowhere and crashed into Rufus, dragging him under. Rufus held his breath, but there was a burning in his chest as he starved for air. It was a horrible sort of peace. The world below the sea, horrible like the hour before the storm. It was so different from the world above that a small part of Rufus wanted to stay there in the quiet. Rufus! Rufus! Somebody shrieked from the raging distance of the world above. Rufus, I'm coming! Rufus shook his head. No, he had to get to the surface. He had to breathe and he had to survive. He gambled some of his precious air by breathing out, producing a little stream of silver bubbles. He swam in the direction they were floating in, and he burst to the surface. His head cleared as air filled his lungs. He could hardly tread water as his lungs spasmed. Rebecca's amber eyes seemed so out of place among the bleak gray and blue of the clouded sea. She didn't say anything, and her expression was completely unreadable. What did Rufus expect? For her to cry out some poetry about love and an early grave? That was all well and good in legends and plays, but this was real. So real. Like survival. That's what mattered right now. Mark threw a piece of wood so far that Rufus couldn't see where it landed. Rufus dived under the water and kicked the unbroken half of one of the boats over and over again until it sank in the black ink, never to be seen again. He swam up for air. His shoulder felt like 1,000 needles were jamming between his joints. That was awesome! Rebecca shouted. At that moment, a huge chunk of boat ran into her and pinned her under the water. No! Adelheid gasped. Mark didn't waste a heartbeat, diving in after his sister in the moment it happened. Rufus held his breath and dived under the water to help. He almost sighed underwater when Rebecca surfaced. Mark popped up after her. Rebecca, are you alright? Clouds of dark red swirled around her forearm. She must have noticed Rufus staring because she shrugged. Come on, guys, it's just a scratch. Alright, you done! Get in the boat now! Adelheid's voice was shrill. When Rufus pulled himself up, a bolt of burning pain sliced through his shoulder like a knife. Rufus began to panic as he realized he couldn't move it. He felt he fell back into the freezing water. He tried again. This time, Grandpa gave him a hand. Rufus had only now become fully aware of how much his shoulder hurt, and Rebecca's wrist was bleeding profusely. She casually washed it off in the edge of Octavius' small boat. The storm wasn't over yet. Adelheid had grown very quiet. She was as composed as ever, but there was pain in her eyes. Rebecca sat by her and looked up. Adelheid, are you alright? Is it the baby? Mark kneeled next to her, breathing heavily. Adelheid nodded. Yes, baby is coming now. Does it have to be now? To Rufus's surprise, Adelheid launched into a long stream of Germanic curse words at her husband. Mark didn't flinch. We are going to get back to shore. I don't care how, we will make it. You understand? He began paddling like his life depended on it. No, like his life of his wife and child depended on it. Rebecca and their grandfather grabbed oars and joined him. There weren't any more, but Octavius and Rufus could help work the rudder. Mark shot a glance at his wife. How do you feel? How you think I feel? Just hang on. You're gonna be all right. We're gonna get out of this. Mark's voice was shaky, his powerful muscles bulging and cramped as he strained to paddle even harder. Rebecca was praying. Bang! Suddenly, a bolt of white-hot lightning struck so near that the boat flew sideways at the explosion, and Rufus could feel the heat. His heart was pounding out of his chest. The shore was still far away. Another bolt of lightning spurred up from cloud to cloud directly above their heads, and for a heartbeat, the sky was as bright as midday. For a split second, there was nothing above or below Rufus but water. But then there was a burst of cool air. A wave had washed over the boat. The tiny vessels remained upright, but the soaked Christians clung to the sides of the frail wooden protector. Suddenly, they were on top of a mountainous wave, and just as suddenly, they were crashing down again. The water beneath the boat felt like it was hard. Rufus squeezed his eyes shut. Lord, help us! They were all going to die at sea. All of them. How unfair it was! For Rufus to meet these people, to grow to love them, and for them all to die so soon. And what of his mother? Was she to lose her 12 of her children? How cruel, how twisted, how sick was fate. Suddenly, abruptly, Rufus remembered a story his grandpa had read one morning. Jesus and his disciples were in a storm. Well, like this one. What made Rufus remember that a moment he would never know. But the words of Jesus to the disciples were branded into his mind that day. Peace. Have you so little faith that you are afraid? Rufus saw a wave coming up to the side of them. He jumped to the back of the boat and shoved the rudder, steering them away just before it crashed, just a pace and a half away. All was calm for a mouse's heartbeat before thunder and lightning interrupted the short moment of peace. I have a plan, Rufus panted. Let's hear it! Mark's center removed and his paddling was almost automatic. His shoulder was twitching involuntarily. I think we can help steer the boat by leading on it from the outside, but I'm going to need some help. I'm in, Rebecca said immediately. Octavius agreed. Sick. No way Rebecca's doing it without me, Mark agreed loyally. He looked back at Adelheid, fully in labor, and he looked sick with concealed panic. Grandpa was whispering something in her ear. The four Christians slid into the water and held on to different sides of the boat. You better know what you're doing, Mark growled. I don't. Rufus, no use trying to hide it. But I know we have to do something. Oddly, Mark accepted that. He, for some reason, seemed to trust Rufus. That was terrifying. Rufus sure didn't trust himself.